Roger Federer has left an enormous hole in tennis with his departure, but the Laver Cup proved to be a very fitting end to his spectacular career. One of the highlights of this super memorable weekend was all the Nadal content we got. But did you know that these two go way back? In today's video, we're talking about the time Rafa Nadal joined Mirka in Roger's box at 17. Let's get started. First up, Nadal meets Federer. Let's take a trip down memory lane, all the way back to 2004. A 17-year-old Spaniard stunned the world when he defeated a newly promoted world #1 Federer in straight sets in Miami. Little did everybody know that it was the start of the most beautiful relationship in tennis. But their first official match came a week before that at Indian Wells. Rafa and Tommy Robredo defeated Roger and Yves Allegro in 3 sets. After the game, the two exchanged nice words at the net and in the locker room. It was the first time these two future legends and rivals shared the court together. One thing led to another, and the Swiss maestro invited teenage Rafa to attend his quarter-final singles match against Juan Ignacio Chela. Of course, the Spaniard was more than willing to accept. He joined the world #1's box and even appreciated his performance as he defeated the Argentine in just an hour and 3 minutes. And well, the rest, as they say, is history. Next, how did that game go? Folks, we're talking about Federer at the beginning of his career. How could it have gone? He absolutely thrashed Chela, winning the game 6-2, 6-1. Raj lost serve only once and took almost 60% of the return points, as visible in the final score. The Swiss broke his opponent 5 times and qualified for the Final Four at Indian Wells for the first time in his career. The world #1 fired a return winner for another break at 5-2 and claimed the first set. In the second game of the second set, he got another break and raced to a 5-0 advantage in almost no time. Federer moved over the top with a hold and booked his place in the semifinal. Now, watching him front row, Rafa must have gotten some super useful tips to challenge the best player in the world, as he beat him in 2 sets later in Miami and started one of the biggest rivalries in the history of the sport. Following this, Nadal over the years. Where do we even begin? Knowing these two so well now, it almost feels like this was always meant to be. The physical attributes of both alone gave everything that was needed for one of the most fascinating dynamics in sporting history. Federer's right hand to Nadal's left, the Swiss' elegant backhand to Rafa's brawny forehand, Raj's calmness to the Spaniard's ferocious roars. How else was this going to go? It's a match made in heaven. And one of the most beautiful things about Nadal is the mutual love between the two. It's made their relationship stand out like no other. Their overall head-to-head sees Nadal leading 24-16, but that's just numbers. To his advantage, most of the time the two have played together, they've been on clay. Now, nobody will ever argue that Rafa isn't the greatest clay player of all time. He simply is. But there's more to their rivalry than that. Let's look at some of their most iconic matches, starting with the 2008 Wimbledon final. This is widely regarded as the greatest tennis match ever. Nadal lasted for almost 5 hours in this monumental game. It was the 3rd consecutive time the two were playing the Wimby final, with Raj winning the last 2, and they had everything to play for. The maestro obviously began the match as the favorite, but Rafa produced one of the best performances of his career to beat the then 5-time Wimbledon champion in 5 sets. Earlier this month, Federer regarded this as the worst loss of his career, and we get it. He talked about how much was on the line. He needed a win, but it went the other way, and it was heartbreak for the Swiss maestro. Next, let's talk about the 2009 Australian Open final. For many, this is the best tournament ever down under, and of course, it ended with another classic Nadal game. It gave Nadal his first Aussie Open after a game that lasted 4 hours and 23 minutes. He became the first Spaniard to win the tournament, and he became the first man in the Open era era to hold Grand Slam titles on 3 different surfaces at the same time. Meanwhile, Federer missed out on equaling Pete Sampras's record of most majors, but he got there at Roland Garros a couple of months later and then crossed it by winning Wimbledon. There will never be another like him. Not to mention the 2017 Australian Open final. Folks, if there was ever a perfect Grand Slam tournament, it was this. And it was brought to a close by, you guessed it, Nadal. It saw both Roger and Rafa defy age and perception to produce some of the greatest tennis we have ever seen. Fed entered the tournament ranked 16th in the world after he had left the 2016 season midway due to pain in his knee. On the other hand, Rafa hadn't won a Grand Slam since the 2014 Roland Garros, and somehow both turned back the clock and were in the final. Federer eventually triumphed after 5 sets, coming back from 3-1 down in the final set to win 5 games in a row to claim his 18th Grand Slam. It was a fairy tale comeback for the Swiss maestro. Moving on, Federer plays his last game ever with Nadal. Have you ever heard of a rivalry that ends like that? Rafa, who had so much going on in his personal life, flew to London just to accompany the FedEx in his final game. Who does that? He said it was an honor and a privilege to be a part of Fed's last dance. Team World duo Jack Sock and Francis Tiafoe proved to be too good for the veterans and got a victory at the O2, but it was still a celebration for the 41-year-old. Raj embraced his partner for a long hug after the game, and the sold-out crowd came to its feet for the maestro, despite the clock clicking well beyond midnight in London. Once more, Nadal in tears, as were the rest of us. After the game ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the entire arena. Of course, Federer was visibly emotional, but what took everybody by surprise was how much Nadal cried with him. As the two sat on the bench after the game, they could be seen holding hands and just sobbing. It was heartbreaking to see because nobody wanted the Swiss to leave. It was just as heartwarming because all of the love he had around him, it's what he deserved. We'll get through this somehow, Raj said as he came onto the court one final time to talk to Jim Courier. He talked about how special it was that Rafa shared this moment with him, and he thanked him for being there. Later, he said again that he'd never forget what the Spaniard did for him in London. Coming up, Nadal talks about Federer leaving. Speaking of Raj's retirement, the 22-time Grand Slam champion expressed that a part of him was leaving with the maestro because he was always next to him or in front of him in all the important moments of his life. He said that it was a huge honor to be a part of this amazing moment of history, and just sharing a lot of things with Roger over the years had been very special. The 36-year-old stated that it was emotional to see him leave, and it was difficult to describe. He was asked about his feelings in those final moments, and Rafa admitted that he was a sensitive person, and when he saw somebody he appreciated like that, it was hard for him not to get overwhelmed. He revealed that he actually cried again when he got to his room later that night. Seeing these two go from uncontrollably laughing on camera to sobbing while one of them says goodbye to the sport is a very bittersweet feeling. It's making us feel old, but also incredibly lucky to have witnessed this in real time. Finally, Nadal shall live on. We are devastated that we're saying goodbye to the greatest player in the history of the sport, but he's promised that he'll stay in touch and be involved in the sport in some way. We'll take anything Federer any time of the day, but the good news is that Nadal is sticking around too. In his farewell tribute to the maestro, Rafa stated that the two still had lots of things left to do, both on and off the court. Later, he said again that he was sure he would play with Raj again someday. Now, the 41-year-old has promised us he's going to play exhibition matches all around the world, so we're keeping our fingers crossed for many Nadal matches in the future. We've lost too much already. We're not ready to lose this just yet. That's a wrap for this video. What's your favorite Nadal moment? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.